The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you all for joining us for the National Conference of State Legislatures Energy Program webinar, Everybody Wins, Driving Economic Growth and Energy Efficiency with On-Bill Financing. My name is Glenn Anderson. I am the Director of NCSL's Energy Program, and I'll be moderating today's webinar, which will explore on-bill financing, an energy efficiency financing tool to help home and building owners overcome cost barriers that often put energy efficiency out of reach. Our presenters will look at why states are implementing on-bill financing, how it works, and effective policies to promote on-bill financing. And I just want to remind everyone that you can type your questions in the box on the right side of the screen at any time. Our speakers will be answering questions after their presentations. And we will also have a recording of this webinar along with the presentations posted on the NCSL website within a few days. And we will be sending out an email to let you know that those are posted. So I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, Casey Bell of the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy. And through her work with the Council, she identifies best practices and policies, as well as market mechanisms that can be used to finance energy efficiency in the residential, commercial, manufacturing, and nonprofit sectors. She also performs macroeconomic modeling of the impacts of energy efficiency policy and programs. In addition, Casey earned her MA in Applied Economics from Johns Hopkins University and holds BAs in Economics and Political Science from the Muhlenberg College. So without further delay, let's welcome Casey Bell.
Thank you very much, Glenn. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with folks today about on-bill financing. On-bill financing, we have found, has been sort of a very effective solution in certain environments to overcoming first cost barriers to energy efficiency. Let's advance to slide 2. Okay, great. Before I even get started talking a little bit about on-bill financing, which is a mechanism that allows utility customers to invest in energy efficiency improvements and then repay that investment through an additional charge on their utility bill. This is a mechanism that sort of leverages the utility-customer relationship to allow them to invest in energy efficiency services from the utility and sort of consolidates the cost into one bill. It can also be structured in a way so that the bill, we call it bill neutrality, and the customer's bill then will neither, it will not necessarily increase every month because they've gotten the capital, but they'll be repaying it through the energy savings. We find that energy efficiency is sort of a great investment from a variety of perspectives. Sort of the more obvious perspectives are the environmental benefits and the fact that it saves customers and businesses money. From a policy perspective, we've also found that energy efficiency drives economic development as well as job creation. And the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy has a lot of resources that we could share that sort of speaks a little more to that point. From a utility perspective, energy efficiency could be an excellent resource for demand-side management and disaster risk management. And from a finance perspective, we find that, particularly in the past couple of weeks, there's some potential for secondary market investment in energy efficiency, which could bring some more capital into the market that can also help us take better advantage of these other benefits. Okay, next slide. That said, this is sort of, it sounds like it's almost a common sense investment, but there are still barriers to overcome. And we mentioned that on-bill has been sort of effective is an effective way to overcome that upfront capital cost barrier. This slide sort of shows some of the traditional barriers to energy efficiency. This slide in particular is sort of specific to multi-tenant buildings. These are buildings with split incentives between owners and tenants, both in the commercial sector as well as in the residential multifamily sector. We sort of color-coded these 4 barriers by the extent to which financing is capable of handling some of these barriers. So, for instance, we find that, financing is an excellent tool for helping to smooth upfront capital costs for projects. If structured effectively, it can help to smooth incentive problems and competing investment priorities. But, we do find that there's still sort of some issues on the demand side for energy efficiency that financing can't necessarily solve, but complementary policies such as building disclosure and labeling might help with, and incorporating energy efficiency into mortgage underwriting might help with valuation. So, it's sort of important to, when you're pursuing different policies for promoting energy efficiency, understanding sort of the strengths and weaknesses of financing as one tool in your toolkit, which leads to the next slide. Where we see that on-bill financing is really but one of several tools in the toolkit. And, the tools that we're listing here that are financing mechanisms and some of the most popular just in terms of, what's getting a lot of attention right now are on-bill financing and property assessed clean energy or PACE financing, are energy efficiency specific financing mechanisms, which can be very effective in getting energy efficiency to markets that may be traditionally harder to reach, such as small businesses, low and moderate income residential customers, multifamily buildings. There's a variety of ways to structure these energy efficiency specific lending products to be able to tap harder to reach markets. But that's not to say that there isn't also a role for more traditional financing for energy efficiency specific loan products that are delivered by small or delivered just by traditional lenders can also be effective for certain types of customers. In addition, incorporating energy efficiency into other transaction processes such as refinance for both residential and commercial buildings is another way to deliver energy efficiency. That said, on-bill does have some specific benefits that can make it particularly useful to delivering in markets that may be underserved, and also has some specific attributes that might make it attractive to different types of customers. So let's drill down a little bit into on-bill financing. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, on-bill financing is a mechanism that allows customers to invest in energy efficiency and repay their obligation through the charge on their utility bill. There have been a lot of approaches to on-bill financing over the past couple of years. One of the approaches that has received sort of a lot of attention in the past year or so has been on-bill repayment, which is a type of on-bill financing that leverages third-party capital to deliver the financing. To date, on-bill repayment, it only exists in a couple of locations and is not as widespread as some of the utility-delivered on-bill financing programs to date. But California is making some attempts to get a statewide on-bill repayment program going, as well as Hawaii. And some might consider New York's on-bill recovery program to also be a form of on-bill repayment program. On-bill financing more broadly can be structured in a number of ways, as a loan or a tariff, which is a charge on the utility bill for energy efficiency services that can be structured to follow the meter, which is a way of overcoming that well-documented split incentive problem. It can also be structured as a service agreement or any sort of hybrid models between these types. There have been, sort of traditional loans delivered for on-bill financing that are sort of serviced by financial institutions or some funds have been set up that are statewide revolving loan funds to provide capital, and you know, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to on-bill, and sort of the beauty of the approach is that the common common attribute is that it's repaid through the utility bill, but it's a very customizable approach that can be used to fit a variety of different sort of policy landscapes and building stock landscapes and you know, a variety of local attributes. It could also serve an array of markets, and we talked a little bit about that. So I will go ahead to the next slide, which is the current on-bill landscape. And this is just a map that we put together. This is a little bit older, I believe, that we used this map in October, so there may be some additions that were a little overdue to update it. But this is just sort of a feel for, you know, sort of the scope of the programs, where we're seeing them across the country. The scale of the programs is still relatively small. You know, we don't see programs that get above a couple of $1 million at this point, but I think a lot of that is going to change as we see sort of on-bill repayment approaches start to grow. And I should mention, I'm sure Jocelyn or Glenn will mention this later, that NCSL is also developing some tools that can deliver information about legislation that enables on-bill financing, which may be of use and of interest to some folks on the phone. Next slide. You know, a lot of times I'll get calls from policy folks across states, and the question that they'll give to me is, how do I get on-bill in my state? And one of the questions, the first question that I'll ask back is, well, what is it that, you know, why is it that you want on-bill in your state? There's a number of other approaches to financing for efficiency, and financing is just sort of one tool in the toolkit for delivering efficiency. So I've sort of designed this part of the presentation to talk a little bit about some of the considerations that are really important when you're putting together an on-bill program, both from sort of the fundamental considerations, who are you trying to reach, and you know, how can you best structure a financing product that's attractive to that particular market sector and is going to serve them effectively, to some of the secondary considerations that, you know, what are some of the complementary components of this program that are going to continue to make it attractive to your target audience, and you know, that are going to help the program to succeed. So next slide. I'll say that the most important of these is the program objectives. Before you adopt an on-bill program, I think it's really important for you to identify what it is that, you know, you are really trying to accomplish. Who is your target audience, and, you know, are you trying to tap into energy efficiency for the economic development benefits, or are you trying to tap into energy efficiency for the energy savings benefits? These aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but at the same time, different structures of programs are going to, you know, sort of target those objectives a little bit differently. And you know, if you're trying to serve underserved markets, you know, there are a lot of ways to structure win-win approaches that meet your objectives, but at the same time, you know, it's going to meet some objectives better than others, and these are sort of really important considerations when you're developing a program. Next slide. Sort of piggybacking on that idea about program objectives is the target market. So you take sort of your goals and your objectives, and, you know, I think that some significant analysis on your region's sort of building stock and energy use can really go a long way in helping you to determine which markets within the economy are most likely to gravitate towards an on-bill product. And, you know, if you can get that target market to take advantage of the product, you'll find that some are better suited to helping you to meet your objectives than others. So this is, you know, sort of a really important follow-on consideration to that program objective. Next slide. In addition, depending on your objectives and your target markets, as I mentioned before, on-bill programs can be structured in a number of ways. And we've seen programs that have been administered by a variety of different entities, from utilities to community development financial institutions, financial services providers, more traditional services for lending products, to sort of third-party companies or nonprofits. We find investor-owned utilities have had a lot of success in sort of serving small businesses, and that's helped them to reach some of their demand-side objectives. In a little bit, you're going to hear about a cooperative program, which is serving residential customers, they've sort of done really significant job in sort of making an impact on some of the lives of their customers. And this program sort of got a different motivation than the investor-owned utilities, you could call both successful within their target markets. But at any rate, there are different reasons why a utility might make sense as an administrator, but to take some of the burden of using a utility, which is a non-traditional lender, for lending, having a CDFI or a financial services partner or a third-party capital provider as a partner or administrator in the program could also be a really effective way to structure these things. I should also mention that for more information on engaging partners, particularly lending institutions, ACEEE just released a report today on engaging small to mid-sized regional lenders in the market for efficiency, which is something that you might want to check out. So next slide. There are also a lot of considerations, in terms of financial product structuring that are going to depend on, again, your objectives, your market, your target market, and your administrator. I mentioned that, there's sort of two mainstream approaches, the tariff financing and the loan-based financing, sort of differences in debt classification, transferability, and financing terms are really going to depend on your target market. Bill neutrality is sort of a big question. I mentioned before that it's possible to structure an on-bill loan so that the utility bill will either stay the same or be reduced a little bit. This is particularly good for sort of there's been some criticism of bill neutrality as just sort of an opportunity to reach low-hanging fruit, whereas if you have a customer that's sort of not necessarily financially constrained, that is a little bit more proactive and interested in leveraging the financing to do a deeper retrofit, that bill neutrality may hinder the ability to get a deeper retrofit. But the appropriateness of bill neutrality, once again, depends on a variety of other decisions that you're making in the program design. Next slide. And finally, there are a number of different sources of capital, as I've sort of mentioned. Some of the utility-administered models right now are using ratepayer funds. There's been some exploration into using shareholder funds. That hasn't really panned out to date. There have been a lot of, there's been a fair amount of public resources that have been directed towards on-bill programs, these have been fairly successful in a number of environments. Again, this is a product that can be really attractive to private sector institutions as well. And as I mentioned, New York's on-bill program has actually been successful in getting an investment-grade bond rating and doing a bond issuance in order to get some private sector investors to inject a little bit more capital into the market. So they bundled and sold some of their loans to secondary market investors, which is something that really helps sort of the future potential of some of these programs. And next slide. So again, after you've made some of these, first primary decisions, There are a variety of secondary considerations that come, whether or not you need a credit enhancement in the form of loan loss reserve might be helpful to you in terms of attracting secondary market capital. We found that, in the New York program, leveraging loan loss reserve that was traditionally used for water products has allowed them to grow and expand the program through that secondary market activity. Your customer eligibility requirements and project eligibility requirements are very much going to depend on your program goals. We've seen some really interesting marketing out there, and the program that you're about to hear about from the electric cooperatives actually mines their complaint calls to, I hope I didn't scoop the lead there, but in order to reach customers that might benefit most from the improvements. So there's a lot of interesting ways to do this, but these are secondary considerations because those first considerations are truly, sort of fundamental to putting together a successful program. Next slide. And the next two slides, what I've just done here is just to, sort of show that we tend to, a lot of times when we're aggregating programs, when we're sort of examining them from a national perspective, we tend to sort of constrict ourselves by looking at sort of loan volume or participation rates or, just a variety of these metrics that sort of, tend to be determinants of success at a broader scale. But I, would actually encourage folks to sort of look at these things holistically. And here I compare three programs sort of by, what they started with in terms of available capital, what their goals were, how well they've been able to to achieve their goals, and this is all very useful information because there is really no one-size-fits-all solution in terms of getting energy efficiency, encouraging investments in energy efficiency. This is just a very important tool. So I think we need to think carefully about how we measure success. Next slide. And again, just a little bit more drill down information into comparing sort of these different approaches to on-bill financing. And on some level, I would consider each of these programs to be to have achieved some level of success. So they're all going to look a little bit different. Next slide. And just finally, sort of as a wrap up, I wanted to just share a few thoughts on policy that supports on-bill programs. There have been several states that have enacted enabling legislation, probably a few more than several states that have enabled on-bill financing. And the approach to doing it really kind of depends on the state. I think engagement with the utilities early on in the process, especially if you're working with investor-owned utilities, is really important. Billing system overhaul can be something that's really expensive. It's really sort of important to figure out who's going to sort of reap the benefits of the program when you're dealing with dual fuels. If you're putting together an on-bill repayment program where you're working with third-party financial institutions, sort of figuring out who's going to get paid first in the event of partial payment has been contentious in some states, but has been worked out pretty smoothly in others. Just sort of establishing these connections early on in the process are really sort of some of my broader thoughts on how to get started effectively. Next slide. And this is just sort of a shameless plug. If this has been a topic that's been of interest to you, ACEEE has two pretty great events coming up. The one that I draw your attention to is the Energy Efficiency Finance Forum, where we cover a number of topics that are related to finance for energy efficiency, including mechanisms such as on-bill and PACE, different policy approaches, some of the activity that's going on in secondary markets, and it may be of interest to some of the audience here. So I would encourage that you check it out. It'll be May 11th through 13th in DC this year. And that concludes my presentation.
Thanks so much, Casey. That was an excellent overview and introduction. Before we move on, we did have one question that I think would be great to address right now for you. That is the fact that there are utilities that have implemented on-bill financing, and then also states that have created programs through legislation. Can you comment on what might be the advantages or disadvantages of either approach, and how they might, I guess, compare?
Sure. So without getting into too many specifics, I would say that one of the challenges in putting together enabling legislation for on-bill has been, perhaps to be a little bit too prescriptive and heavy-handed, which can, without the buy-in from utilities. So simply requiring utilities to adopt on-bill can be problematic. We've seen examples where sort of the requirement to adopt on-bill has been problematic because the utility hasn't quite figured out a way to fit it into its business model effectively, and may just offer sort of a token program where you can finance a $900 refrigerator or something of that nature, which isn't necessarily really an effective way to leverage this tool. So that's sort of a specific challenge. So I mean, there's a number of best practices out there, but in some cases too, it's also a little bit too soon to tell, whether or not the program that results from the legislation has been effective. But I think one state that has been really sort of held up as a leader of things working well together has been Hawaii. So I would encourage folks to take a look, especially for the on-bill repayment model, to Hawaii later.
Great, thank you. So next we'll be moving on to our presenters, and we're very fortunate to have them to present on South Carolina's Help My House program. Michael Smith is manager of the energy programs at Central Electric Power Cooperative located in Columbia, South Carolina. His responsibilities include South Carolina Co-op's energy efficiency efforts, renewable energy integration, and demand response programs. He currently serves as the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association's Renewable and Distributed Energy Membership Advisory Group. Lindsay Smith leads the Help My House, an innovative, nationally recognized residential energy efficiency program available to South Carolina's consumer-owned, not-for-profit electric cooperatives. He also serves as Director of Public and Member Relations at the Electric Cooperatives of South Carolina, the trade association for the state's co-ops. So let's welcome Michael and Lindsay. And I wanted to add as well, just before they start, that you can enter your questions at any time on the right-hand side in the box, and we will be answering those proceeding the presentation. So thank you, Michael and Lindsay.
Thank you, Glenn. This is Lindsay. I'll be leading off, but we are a two-headed monster, and Mike is the brains of the outfit. So bear with me. I'll get through my part and then let him talk, and we'll switch back and forth a little bit on different parts of this. You're seeing on your screen right now the Help My House logo, and you heard Glenn talk a little bit about our program. It's important to draw a distinction for you before we get into this presentation. Help My House has been for us two different things in its young life. A couple of years ago, it was a pilot program, a research program to test a program model and see if on-bill financing could work in a lot of different ways, and Mike will talk about that. And currently, it is a working program for a handful of co-ops that have decided they liked so much what happened in that pilot project, that pilot program, that they wanted to continue to offer it to their members. So they're still flying the Help My House flag, still offering this program. Next slide. Let me tell you a little bit about the electric cooperatives. There are 20 distribution cooperatives in South Carolina. You see the map there. We cover the majority of the state. All 46 counties are touched by electric cooperatives. We have 70,000 miles of line. We serve over 1.3 million South Carolinians with electricity. We're, as Glenn mentioned, independent, not-for-profit, and consumer-owned utilities, so that makes us uniquely positioned to do some of the things you're going to hear about in this presentation. It's also important to note co-ops do not own power plants. We buy power from people who do through Central Electric Power, the organization that Mike works for. Next slide, please. Most of the people that we buy our power from are supplying it by burning coal. That number's come down significantly since fracking for natural gas became a major factor and sort of changed things pricing-wise. We're now down to about 60% of cooperative electricity generated from coal. It was just a couple years ago, more than 80%. So it's come down dramatically because of natural gas and availability and cost. The average system cost of a megawatt of power in our state is $750,000, actually on our system, $750,000. To replace more of that coal, you see the costs there for both natural gas and nuclear. Those are extremely high costs, in the millions, $3 and $5 million. So one of the reasons we started talking initially about on-bill financing and energy efficiency as an alternative is those numbers. Those are big numbers. Next slide, please. And we'll look a little bit more in depth at those numbers so you can see projecting out. And this is what utilities do. They project. What's it going to cost us 10 years down the road, 15, 30 years down the road? So you see there, these are incredibly expensive directions to go, particularly nuclear, and there are construction costs that you cannot plan for. Increases that are brought on by shortages of this and that, demand. So those numbers could go up even more than what are projected there. Next slide, please. Let me tell you a little bit about our members. We don't call them customers because, as I said early on, they own the co-op. They are member owners, and 24% of them live in manufactured housing, mobile homes. Some people call them trailers. That's 3 times the national average, and that comes with this whole set of challenges that we had to tackle, at least in part, with this program. 50% more likely, our folks are 50% more likely to live below the poverty line. And in some months, many of them may spend 60 to 80% of their income on energy. It is not at all unusual for somebody living in a double-wide mobile home to have a $400, $500, $600, $700 electric bill in the coldest months of the year, January, February. We just had a nice ice storm here. I'm sure many of you saw on the news. Those are expensive days because most of those mobile homes, manufactured homes, are sold with electric resistance heating, which is not unlike the space heaters that you buy at the store, except it's on a larger scale, and that's a really expensive way to heat a home. We rank 7th in cooling degree days per year, so we're a hot place to live and humid as well. And 80% of our folks use electricity as a primary source of heating. Next slide, please. We began to look, as I said, for alternatives to having the people we buy power from build more power plants. And one of those in our mind was on-bill financing. Casey did a terrific job setting up what on-bill financing is about, so I won't go over it in much more depth than what she's already done so ably. Next slide, please. But I will talk about the fact that we had to get a new law passed in order to make it work properly for us. We were trying to avoid the prospect of credit scoring individuals for these loans, because in so doing you lose a lot of the people, you rule out a lot of the people who need this program the most. And so we worked with our General Assembly here in South Carolina in 2010 to pass a new state law that allowed us to move forward, tie those loans to the meter, as you heard Casey describe. We can now, thanks to that law, disconnect for non-payment of the loan payment. So if you get your electric bill in the mail and you have one of these loans, you have your electricity charge, just like you always have, as a line item. Then you have your loan payment as a line item, and then you have the bottom line. You have to pay both. You can't just pay your electricity and not pay your loan payment, or the cooperative has the authority under state law to disconnect your power. So there's your risk management. The loan stays with the home, stays with the meter, as Casey described, if the home is sold. And as I said earlier, these provisions help eliminate the need for a credit check. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned at the very outset, we decided we needed to test this thing. It was originally proposed, the model we used in a 2010 House bill, U.S. House bill, congressional bill proposed by Congressman Clyburn from here in South Carolina. It was an idea born in our state among the co-ops that we took to Washington. Congressman Clyburn took it to the floor of the House. It passed in 2010, did not make it to the Senate floor before those midterm elections. And so in 2011, the Board of Central Electric Power, where Mike works, said, let's try this thing out. Let's have a show of hands from the 20 co-ops who would like to, or who's willing to volunteer and do this. Next slide, please. And 8 cooperatives raised their hands, and here they are listed for you. Those brave souls decided they would roll up their sleeves and help us try this thing out. And Mike and I and a lot of other people got involved in helping to administer it and make the operation of it work. I work at the Electric Cooperatives of South Carolina. We're the trade association for the co-ops. So we lobby, we communicate, we do legal work. And then I mentioned before, Mike works for Central Electric Power, and in large measure, they are the super consumer, the collection of all 20 co-ops that goes out and buys power and gets it to them. Next slide, please. In order to make this pilot work, we also needed other partners. We needed assistance with program design and outreach, so we partnered with the Environmental and Energy Study Institute in Washington. They were formed by a bipartisan group in Congress to travel across the country and research different energy efficiency and renewable energy innovation and come back to Congress and report on it. So they were our report card. And to pay for their work, we got a grant from the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. We also hired ECOBA to help us with program planning and management. They're based in Oregon, and they've had a lot of experience doing this. And last, we also worked with Cart Donofrio Partners, a full-service marketing firm out of Baltimore, to help us make sure that what we were doing was having a positive impact on our consumers, the people who own us. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike for the next section. Mike?
And then the program, the background, really there were 3 efficiency goals that we wanted to try achieving. One, to reduce wholesale residential power purchase costs that necessarily go in hand. To maintain or improve or member customer satisfaction. We partner with our statewide Lindsay's co-op ECSC to design the pilot program. And while we were doing this, we were also following what was going on in federal legislation that Lindsay discussed. And one of the other important aspects is we wanted to get access to USDA funding. And so we were able to acquire a Red Leg loan, a Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant, for $740,000 to help help with the loan pool for this pilot. So what were the goals of our Help My House pilot once we got started? Well, we wanted to determine how to overcome the barriers. Next slide, please. We wanted to determine how to overcome the barriers to implementing these energy efficiency improvements. Barriers like member acceptance, contractor training, validating the work on contractors. We wanted to establish a functional model for on-bill financing. Who will participate, which of our members, viable sources of loan funds, Red Leg, which is one funds, a central support function to get consistency across the state, but also allow some flexibility within individual co-op territories. And then each co-op played a little bit different role in this, and so we had to build some flexibility there. determine a cost-effective, participant, person who is getting the work done on their home. Are the energy savings enough to cover the loan payments, month to month? To the co-ops, is there enough demand savings of reducing our peak to help save on our wholesale power costs? And, a lot of times we wrap that up in the load factor term resource. As we grow into the future and we want to meet our future energy needs, can we look at energy efficiency as a resource instead of building more generation? And then finally, a very critical one is to determine our member satisfaction. Next slide. So our structure, as you see, is on this graph here. We had to create a separate organization called KW Savings to actually handle the money, and it was part of the requirements of the Red Lake Bond. As you see in the centerpiece, that's really the function of the distribution cooperative, the one whose member is being served. And within each of the 8 co-ops, this may look a little bit different how it works. For some co-ops, they had the auditor in-house. For other co-ops, they used a special auditor that was hired as a third party. And so there is a little bit of change, and we learned from that differences in our program. And then you have finally the member. Next slide. The pilot process is pretty straightforward. The first objective is to select some participants for the program, and each co-op did a little bit different. Casey and Lindsay both mentioned the high bill complaints. So some co-ops went to their high bill complaint members, and they looked at their energy use to see if they could be viable candidates for a program. Others looked at the across all of their membership and looked at the energy use to see if they were viable candidates. And so each co-op was up to them on how they determined how to select participants for this program. After a participant was selected and contacted, and they agreed to participate in the program, someone was sent out to the home to make sure that there wasn't something major going on, like a bad roof, floor falling through, that would take that house out of the program. So the audit was done. It was not very technical. It was more us going out to the home, explaining the program, what it's about, and also looking around to make sure that it was worth sending an auditor out there. That's the visual audit, and the member step a trained auditor is the Building Performance Institute to certify. Now, usually the audit would take 2 to 3 hours. It was looking at every crevice in the house for the opportunities that were there. Is there enough insulation in the attic? Are there some air sealing opportunities? Performing a blower door test, which is attaching a device to the front door and pulling a vacuum on the house and measuring how leaky it is. Duct blasters, we had to hook special equipment onto the ductwork and see how leaky the ductwork is. And they write up a report. We run it into a model and see how much energy savings we can get. The next step is loan approval. That's by the co-op. The homeowner will make sure that the homeowner owns the land, or if it's a landlord, that all the ownerships are in line. And contractor selection. Now, part of the legislation on on-bill financing requires that our member has a choice in their contractor. And so we gave a list of contractors to our members, pre-approved contractors, for them to select from. Once the loan was order and the contractor was selected, then came the installation of the work. A contractor goes out, they install, and then once they finish doing all the work in the home, some of the work is pretty significant. We spend on average over $7,000 a home, replacing HVAC units, sealing up the home, adding a lot of insulation. So once that's done, the auditor that did the first audit goes back out and takes a look to make sure that the work was done to standard. Once that passes and the project is approved, KW Savings cuts a check to the contractor, and we're pretty much done, ready to go. Next slide, please. And so these are the measures that we did on each of the homes, and I'll go through these quickly. Most every home, 99% of the 125 homes that ended up getting loans or this work done, required some form of air sealing. It could be as little as just putting a strip around the door to we did a log home that had to caulk every crevice in the home. Duct leakage was another big one. We require as part of our program that we got the duct leakage below 5%, and that's a standard that is valid for new homes now. So we really wanted to attack the ductwork because not only does it keep you from wasting heat, it addresses some air quality issues if you have ducts in the attic or in the basement that draw in bad air. Attic insulation. Most of our homes had some form of attic insulation, but we bumped them up to R38 for stick-built homes, for site-built homes, and an equivalent of R25 for manufactured home. We have some space constraints in manufactured homes that allow us to only put so much insulation into them. Manufactured homes are the primary ones that had electric furnaces that Lindsay described earlier. And we had a home that was a 2007 that was part of our program because it had an electric furnace. The savings from an electric furnace change out to a heat pump are immediate and they're big. Heat pumps, older heat pumps were replaced for insulation, and we had some miscellaneous stuff. If you look to the graph on the right, you'll see that the electric furnace change out has the highest predicted savings. 27% of all the savings in this program come from just changing out that one appliance. Duct leakage is another big piece, and attic insulation, while it's very important, if you were to have some attic insulation in there, the added benefit of bumping up to R38 isn't quite as big on the energy savings. Next slide, please. So here are the results. We modeled each home in a software package called Lim Design, and we estimated air savings across all the homes to be over 11,500 kilowatt hours per year a home. And that number is a very bold number. That's as much energy as some homes use on average in a year. And after all the work was done, we got an actual energy savings adjusted for the weather of almost 11,000 kilowatt hours a year. So we hit pretty close to what we had hoped to hit. The project cost on average for the home was about $7,684, and the realized payback is about 6.6 years on average at home. Next slide. So what this means is, if you look on the right here, the annual energy savings realized is $1,157 a year. That was with the current rates at the time. It's actually gone up a little bit since then. The average loan payment is a little over $70 a year. So, the annual loan payment is almost $870 a year. So there's a net savings on average for these homes of $288 per year. Next slide, please. As many of you are aware, we had a pretty tough winter. In South Carolina, the costs are naturally winter peaking. If you look on the graph on the right, that is basically a daily load curve of our system on a winter day. And from left to right is midnight to noon to midnight again. And you see our peak occurs early in the morning. Well, the dark area are the homes before the work was done. And this is measured energy. We pulled energy used in these homes before the work was done. And the light area is those exact same homes after the work was done. And this is really what is important to utility. A lot of programs are measured by energy savings, but for us, it's the demand savings. Is how does it change our load curve? If you look at that graph closely, you'll see that the load curve actually improves. Not only, we lose energy cells, sure, but our demand is reduced significantly, and this has real value to a utility that has to generate to those peaks. Next slide, please. And so as we wrap up this program, there are a handful of co-ops that went ahead and started their own on-bill financing program. Aiken Electric Power Cooperative, Black River in the middle of the state, Lynch's River in the upper part, Santee Electric Cooperative, and York Cooperative. And Central is still, statewide is still performing the function of standardization for these programs, but they each have gone on their own, securing their own financing and using their own resources. to continue the on-bill financing weatherization project. Lindsay, next slide, please.
I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly. I see our time is short, and just talk to you about the fact that we did survey the folks who participated in our pilot program, 125 homeowners. 96% of them said they had the same or higher satisfaction with their co-op as a result of participating in that. Next slide. Are you more comfortable? You got to ask that question because there isn't a meter you can put on the home. You just simply have to ask. And as you can see, 89, almost 90% of the folks whose homes we improved said they are somewhat or a lot more comfortable as a result of going through and participating in Help My House. Next slide. Are you satisfied with your post-repair electric bills? Again, 89% said yes, either somewhat or very satisfied. Next slide. And among them, Terry and John Norrisworthy of Somerton, South Carolina. They're served by Santee Electric. You see the stats on their home there. They are, as a result of getting that $6,500 loan to upgrade their heat pump, seal their home, insulate it, they're saving $150 to $200 a month, according to Terry Norrisworthy, on average on their electric bill. They're also more comfortable. Their temperature stays more constant. It's just a much better situation for them. Mike, back to you.
Thank you, Lindsay. So the conclusions are that next slide, please. The average home in our pilot dropped energy use by 34%, or almost 11,000 kilowatt hours a year, and that exceeded the loan repayment. Our coincident peak savings was dropped about the same amount. Our load factor remained unchanged, which is really valuable for utilities. The homes became more comfortable, which is, contributes to the member satisfaction. And everybody seemed very satisfied with the program. And like I said, it spawned other programs. Next slide. We showcased some of the advantages of the co-ops working together, the standardizations and contractors being able to work between co-ops to the same standards and same expectations. We still perform that central support function. Now, this is limited in some respects so that we didn't prove how many homes are eligible or we work in this program, but that wasn't part of the scope for this. And really, it was just a research program to prove, can we target homes for savings and achieve it? Next slide. So the business case for this program is being exercised by the 4 to 5 co-ops that are now continuing along with the on-bill financing program. Participant member satisfaction is like a big driver for having this program. It's something because our members want it. They want us to be able to offer this kind of service. The load factor impact, like I said, minimal, which were very good. And there is some lost revenue. When you lose the energy cells, that's part of how we collect for our business. But the impacts really, when you look at the numbers, are minimal, even on a larger scale. The long-term prospects for this is really, if we look at this as resources, we run into constraints in the future. The cost of co-op will be less than 2 cents per kilowatt hour, and there isn't any generation out there that we can touch that would offer us that kind of cost. And it also has broader economic benefits by supporting what we have going, jobs and work at the homes. Slide, please. And so the recommendations from this report really is that all co-ops should consider offering a full-scale on-bill financing program. We should collaborate to reduce their costs centrally. We should also support emergency replacement of heat pumps, because heat pumps get replaced every year. And it's really an opportunity for us to go in there and actually make a better, safer, healthier home by doing the ductwork and weatherization. And then we'd also put in load control devices, and these are devices that help us to reduce our peak. That makes it more valuable to the utility. We should consider adding renewable energy storage, and we should look for affiliates and organizations that help us to this effect. Lindsay?
Next slide, please. I think we'll end on this slide, and I will just tell you that the work we've done and the work that others have done across the country in on-bill financing is beginning to affect federal policy in release of new loan programs and loan instruments from the USDA and RUS. The Rural Energy Savings Program I mentioned that was passed by the U.S. House a couple of years ago is back in the Farm Bill as of this year, so that's another lending instrument that co-ops can avail themselves of. And I'll stop there, Glenn, and toss it back to you. I know we have precious little time for any questions and wrap up.
Oh, thanks so much, Lindsay and Michael. Excellent presentation. That's a great program, and I think we do have a few questions. We definitely have time for a couple here. The first one we had come in is really about how you calculate or estimate what the savings might be and whether the upgrades actually meet those savings in order to ensure that the cost of the financing, for instance, is actually less than the amount saved, and what type of tools you might use for that. And also,
Mike, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I'll address
also
that.
make sure that the contractors are basically forthright and up to snuff.
Right.
Yeah, I can address that.
Okay.
We use REM Design as a modeling software. It's really great for a pilot, but it's not something you want to do for every home going forward. What we realize with the manufactured homes is really you about know what needs to be done if you know the year size of the manufactured home. It's really a lot of, unless there's something exceptional there, it's pretty much the same thing. Now, our average savings in return is an average. We had homes that just absolutely knocked it out of the park. And we had some homes that really didn't see a whole lot of savings. But they use the energy use differently. They were able to keep their home warm in the winter or cool in the summer. And so, as a group is what we care about as a utility. But if individually people are happy with the work and they're now in control of the energy use, that still is a positive thing. And then the other part of the question was on the contractor. Is that correct?
Yeah, the question was about how we vet our contractors, as I understood it. We actually have a training that they have to go through, and then at the end of the training, which is all about our standards as a program, they have to sign an agreement with us in order to be included on our approved contractor list, which is handed to a homeowner once that homeowner qualifies for the program. Once the home meets the standards that Mike just laid out, they get a list of contractors who are available to work in their area, and then we encourage them to get competitive bids. One of the things contractors agree to when they sign that form with us is they understand we will not pay them until we come in after their work is finished in the home. We check it. We run all of those same diagnostic tests that Mike described earlier, and they must meet our target numbers for reductions in air infiltration, as they call it, and everything must be properly installed. Only then do we pay them. If they have not met those standards and requirements, we don't pay them. We make them come back and fix it. So there are a number of checks and balances to make sure that we're putting good contractors into every home and that we're following up behind them and involved directly with every transaction.
And some of the vetting really happens at the back end. When we have to go back to the home 2, 3, 4 times to tell them, hey, you didn't do this right, try it again. Either they get it or they decide themselves that they don't want to participate anymore. But pretty universally, all the contractors, as painful as it was in the beginning, agreed that they learned so much from this program. And really, they all got it by the end. And we didn't have to go back to do a retest, but maybe one more time.
Casey, did you have anything to add?
Well, I was just going to say that there are a number of programs out there. Clean Energy Works Oregon springs to mind as a program that has really sort of cultivated its network of contractors and keeps a very sort of extensive database, both on sort of the performance of the contractors with the, across different projects, but also, in addition to tracking the energy savings, they're also tracking sort of employment trends within the companies or the contractor, the small businesses, And that's also been sort of a useful tool for garnering policy support, in addition to guaranteeing that they have quality service providers that are going into the homes and doing the upgrades.
So we had another question regarding the loan process and how that is secured, whether it's a lien on the property and how that decision is made. And I guess a secondary question to that would be how those determinations are made on who might get a loan, and if there's a credit score requirement, both for the North Carolina or for the Carolina program, South Carolina program, and what programs might be using nationally.
Well, obviously we'll speak to the South Carolina version of the program. As I mentioned during the presentation, we're very deliberate about putting risk management, building it into both the state statute and to the way our program operates, so that we could avoid FICO scoring, credit scoring, the folks we were trying to reach, because we felt like many of those very same people who have the bad credit scores are the very people we needed to be helping with this program. So the risk management is tying that loan to the meter. You're making a loan based on the criteria that Mike laid out a moment ago in talking about testing the home and evaluating with that software. After we get the numbers plugged into it, we're projecting how much we can save them energy on their monthly bill, and whether that savings is enough to cover what their loan payment would be every month. In fact, more than cover. If that formula works for a home, then the home qualifies. So it's not a matter of qualifying an individual, it's qualifying the home and the savings you can generate, projecting the savings you can generate in the home, so that they cover, or more than cover in our case, the loan payment that you'll be adding on to that person's electric bill. Casey, you can talk about the national part. You know a lot more about that.
Sure can. We see a variety of different models out there, so I'll sort of address sort of the general structure of the product. Somebody mentioned specifically about liens. I can think of one program off the top of my head. I believe that the New York residential program is structured as a lien that is subordinate to the mortgage. I have to double check that fact. There's different requirements for different programs. Some require that the loan obligation be paid off before you leave the property. With shorter, with retrofits that require sort of shorter lending terms in single-family residential, I think that can work out okay. Where there's transferability, it's a little less clear, and they're actually, we're just getting to a point where we're starting to see some of these properties transfer, so that we're gathering data on how the process is working. So there'll probably be more to come in the next year or so, just sort of seeing how those transactions work out. Almost every program does it a little bit differently. In terms of, figuring out qualifying credit score, some of these programs just sort of use, traditional underwriting practices and, serve traditionally credit-worthy consumers. Some, there's sort of an outstanding question whether the obligation being tied to the meter and, potentially tied to shut-off, which also differs in different programs, is sort of an enhancement. And, I know that some of the CDFI programs can lend to customers with credit scores in the 500s. That's sort of their business model in a lot of ways, to serve customers that aren't necessarily traditionally served, and to show that there's a potentially functioning market transactions that can occur with those customers. They may have sort of a different risk profile than other types of lending institutions. It really goes back to those fundamental considerations of how you want to, who you want to target with the program, who are you serving with the program, and you know, does it make sense to structure a product that can be used by a less traditionally creditworthy customer, or you know, if you're targeting energy savings and you think that, you know, sort of the market rate for lending, you know, that those types of customers are going to, you know, better serve you in reaching your objectives. You know, there's a variety of choices that need to be made.
Great, thanks. We will close with this final question, I guess, for all of our presenters. But I guess first for Lindsay and Michael, with regards to the Help My House project or pilot phase, and also going in post-pilot, what do you see for the future? And then also what, I guess, with regards to lessons learned for policymakers, what have you found might be good advice that you would share with policymakers if they are thinking about crafting some legislation on this issue?
Mike, do you want to talk about looking into the crystal ball a little bit, future?
Well, I'll let you address the future and where it may be going, but I would like to say, as far as policymakers go, you know, it's a real tough place to be to recommend energy efficiency or to mandate energy efficiency, and then do it for anything else because it does not fit in our business model. You know, losing energy cells, especially under current rates, you know, rates would need to change in order, I think, for energy efficiency to run in utilities, especially regulated utilities. And you know, in South Carolina, we're figuring that out now. As far as if we're doing it for member satisfaction, it's easy. It works. People are happy, and it puts our members in control. But if we do it for a business model and work long in capacity, you know, we have enough generation, it's a lot tougher sell.
And I would sort of amplify and echo some of the sentiments about you know, understanding the utility business model and working to engage utilities early on in the process. It's critical. You know, you're not going to have a successful program unless you have some level of utility buy-in, or at least, you know, do what you can to sort of make things a little bit easier, you know, in terms of fitting the program into their business model. I think that there is a lot of work still to be done on the research side about, you know, some of the different factors that impact the business model, especially, you know, looking at the performance of the business model historically and in new regulatory environments, but even more so, you know, within different sort of macroeconomic landscapes, because, you know, the utility performance in sort of the current state of the world isn't necessarily what the utility of the future is going to look like. So these are all things that you need to be thinking about, you know, while you're having these conversations with key stakeholders. But, you know, engaging stakeholders early on in the process, identifying where interests are aligned, and, you know, even more importantly, identifying where there may be some friction and working those friction points patiently and carefully is sort of, you know, sort of a strong strategy for getting to a successful outcome.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Casey, Lindsay, and Michael, for sharing your expertise on the panel. And I also want to thank our attendees for logging in and participating in today's webinar, and also to join us on March 20th when we will have a webinar with National Renewable Energy Laboratory and Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories, when they will present on renewable portfolio standard costs and how those costs are impacting rates across the U.S. So also wanted to remind you that we will have registration for that, as well as today's recordings and presentations, on our webpage within a few days. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you on our next webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks.